An incident aboard a Russian whaling vessel anchored in the stormy Bering Strait prompts the deployment of a military task force. When that doesn't work, they send some Coast Guard guy named Tom Hansen. My name is Harvey Bodega, and in spinning the wheel of every game ever made, this time it lands on Cold Fear. Cold Fear is a survival horror third-person shooter developed by Paris-based Darkworks, published by Ubisoft and released in 2005. Now, survival horror is one of those well-documented genres with heavily devoted fans, and though we're in a renaissance for the genre right now, the original golden age is commonly accepted to be from, roughly, let's say, March 22nd, 1996 to January 11th, 2005. Your Resident Evils, your Silent Hills, your Dino Crises, your Sirens, Fatal Frame, Parasite Eve, etc. This heyday of inventory management, wonky but charming voice acting,
playtime is officially over, kiddies,
and player disempowerment was then thrust into a transitory period prompted by the release of Resident Evil 4, pushing what would then be called action horror into vogue. Cold Fear, a title even survival horror enthusiasts may not recognize, was released 2 months after this genre-redefining title, where it quickly disappeared into Resident Evil Shadow. I mean, you think Tom Hansen can compete against Leon Kennedy? Look at that guy. Cold Fear's history dates back as far as 1998. Guillaume Girard and Anthony Villette founded Darkworks and put together a pitch for a project called 1906 An Antarctic Odyssey, inspired by the survival horror genre's granddaddy, Alone in the Dark. The idea was survival horror elements, the South Pole, and mysterious findings, a pitch that sounds a lot like a game that would be released in 2002 called The Thing, based on The Thing. With 1906 being inspired by Alone in the Dark, Darkworks turned to the developer of that series, Infogrames, in hopes they would pick it up as publisher. They were impressed, but were like, hey, you like Alone in the Dark, why don't you just rework your little ice game into a new entry, huh? So Darkworks turned 1906 into 2001's Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, the first non-Infogrames developed title in the series and the first mainline release since 1995. After a 2.5-year development cycle, The New Nightmare was released, prompting dislike from some longtime Alone in the Dark fans for 3 main reasons: a console-first focus, the modern setting, and the shift in gameplay to be more like the new standard set by Resident Evil. Other fans, however, consider it to be the last good game in the series, the latest of which caused the studio that developed it to be shelved 4 months after release. Clearly it's hard to please longtime fans while presenting something original, but The New Nightmare was a commercial and critical success, selling over 1 million copies by November of 2002 and even prompted a film adaptation considered to be one of the worst films ever made.
Did you have a nightmare?
That's success, baby. Although Infogrames let them know they wouldn't be brought on for Alone in the Dark 5, Darkworks publicized that they were working on 2 different titles, one of which, quote, with one of the most prestigious Japanese publishers on the market, and to look forward to an announcement during E3 of 2003. However, things didn't turn out so rosy. The first project, originally to be published by Capcom, their prestigious Japanese publisher, returned to the South Pole as an Xbox and PS2 action-adventure title called either USS Antarctica or Lost Mantis, but was cancelled in 2003. Following that cancellation, Darkworks shifted to developing several pitches with hopes that they would be picked up by publishers. One called Orpheus, another wildly incorporating Norse mythology and demons called Jason, and finally a contract by Namco US to develop an action game called Time Crisis Adventure in the Time Crisis Light Gun franchise. Following that weird idea's cancellation, Darkworks scrambled to find a home for their action shooter built from 1906, USS Antarctica, Time Crisis Adventure, and maybe even more discontinued projects, finding one in Ubisoft. The resulting title, Cold Fear, entered alpha as a third-person survival horror game inspired by Alien and The Thing with a protagonist named Tom Hansen, a hardcore Delta Force Navy SEAL guy, a real shoot-first, ask-questions-later kind of dude. I mean, look at him. Looks like he drives a GMC Sierra or something. He would be the protagonist supported by a Russian woman named Arisa Yarsenka, but entering beta, who was blonde and brunette would switch. Arisa would be renamed Lubna, then finally Anna Kamsky, while Tom Hansen went from his "I'm really hard on my teenage son" design to the Coast Guard rescuer to appear in the eventual release. Darkworks only had 18 months to rework and develop Cold Fear, resulting in few iterations from the initial design documents and a fair amount of burnout. Announced at E3 2004 and released worldwide in March 2005 for PS2, Xbox, and PC, critics seem to think that Cold Fear was pretty good, with the main frustrations being the lack of a map and irregular save locations, but particularly praising the opening segment on the whaling vessel. Commercially, however, Cold Fear was an overwhelming financial failure, only selling 70,000 units worldwide by February 2006. Why did it fail? Well, we'll go through the specifics of the gameplay, presentation, and story later, but being released a few months after Resident Evil 4 has to have played a huge part, especially having so many similarities. Additionally, and I have absolutely no evidence to back this up, I suspect the marketing also has a lot to be blamed for. Let's start with the name. Cold Fear? Vague, bad, and not very representative of what happens. The tagline was Hell Freezes Over, which was iterated off an earlier slogan, Face the Horror. Both are bad, but at least Face the Horror is more accurate. I don't get cold from Cold Fear, I get wet, but even the Chinese name translates to extreme cold, so I don't know. Maybe Darkworks just wanted their cold game finally, damn it. They should have done more with On a Hellbound Vessel, Everyone is Dead Weight. This fall, Willem Dafoe in Cold Fear. Confusingly, 2005 also had a movie called Cold Fear, but it seems to be a different type of program. So yeah, the name is not so great, but it doesn't help that on the same shelf of your 2005-era Circuit City likely also held Cold Winter, Snowblind, Ice 9, and how about Fear? So the name Cold Fear probably did very little to help it stand out. So after the promising heights of Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, Darkworks had a well-reviewed but terrifically unsuccessful second outing, which would turn out to be their final release. It didn't turn out to be open and shut like that though. The next project, also under Ubisoft's publishing, would be called Alive, meant to be a post-apocalypse title set in Chicago presented at E3 2008 as I Am Alive. The goal was to feature a variety of playstyles like shooting, tactics, roaming, and exploration, but after swelling to a team of over 100 to accommodate the ambitious vision, Darkworks made it clear to Ubisoft they had to either push out the release date or scale things back. Ubisoft responded by choosing a third option, removing Darkworks from the project entirely and handing it off to their subsidiary Ubisoft Shanghai. It was a gut punch, and although Darkworks submitted a variety of pitches to other publishers in the following years, like a reboot of the Oni Chanbara series and a survival horror game like Dead Island or Condemned called Black Death, they'd eventually close in October of 2011 due to having grown too big and the inability to secure a publisher for their games. To add insult to injury, the Darkworks team saw I Am Alive release a few months later in March 2012 to similar positive critical reception as Cold Fear, but was a distinct financial success. So, Darkworks had some big ideas, clear talent for creating proficient titles, but only 2 were released with their name in the credits. I find Cold Fear incredibly fascinating as an overlooked title in the shadow of Resident Evil 4 by an overlooked developer, so let's explore if a cult classic status is deserved for Cold Fear. Now, I usually don't start by discussing the performance of a game, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Cold Fear has some trouble running on modern machines. The PC Gaming wiki page lists several issues unable to be currently resolved with community patches, and the newer your specs, the more likely to have issues. I certainly experienced what I'll call some unintended character. Some objects would disappear, shadows behaved strangely or appeared at odd angles, lighting would freak out sometimes upon alt-tabbing, which was very disorienting until reboot. There were some soft crashes, especially when picking up certain items, like don't touch the note about red fuel valves. Enemies would get stuck here and there. A set piece made it really easy to find the guy I was supposed to kill because his gun stretched all the way to my character model. Trying to get to the crow's nest without killing enemies felt like something out of Benny Hill. And moving too close to this cryogenic chamber had me admiring Hansen's polygonal cheeks.
Wild ass.
I couldn't tell you which bugs were contemporary and which appeared with age, and while I didn't have trouble getting it running and used no community patches, your mileage will vary. I didn't experience anything game-breaking, and I'd usually recommend the GOG copy, but it's currently only available on Steam. With that said, time to break down the mechanics as I experienced them, and the first hurdle to discuss is movement and the camera. Purists feel strongly about set camera angles and tank controls in survival horror games, while many a more modern-minded gamer would prefer free movement and directional controls. I have no desire to gatekeep one side or the other, or say which is better, purer, or what survival horror should be, except you're both wrong. Cold Fear has both. Some areas are free movement, some are set or panning cameras with tank controls, and I never found this transition to be too disorienting. But I'm also old, so, you know. If you find set cameras and tank controls too frustrating, Cold Fear allows an over-the-shoulder camera on demand, just only when you're aiming a weapon and can't run while doing so. In a few areas, I preferred to creep around aiming rather than be subjected to the default camera, but the set angles only fucked me over once. It's completely serviceable. Items to pick up were never hard to find, especially with a shimmering effect, but these camera systems are understandably divisive today. Other movement mechanics include Hansen's resistance meter, which functions as stamina for running but also grip strength if clinging to an edge, and pressing E to interact. That is it. No inventory management or inventory at all other than guns and ammo, and really, there aren't even any puzzles. I know, survival horror superfans may already be leaping up, a predatory gleam in their eye as they're ready to type out that makes Cold Fear not a real survival horror game, but actually action horror. There's some truth to that, and genuinely I don't really care, but Cold Fear feels like a hybrid of two hybrid genres. The action game with horror theming, and the survival horror game turned action. Something like Area 51, The Thing, Doom 3, blended up with Resident Evil 4, The Suffering, and Dead Space. I feel comfortable calling it a survival horror third-person shooter, just know those more contemplative and disempowering mechanics are almost entirely absent in this game. That said, continuing the legacy of survival horror is the level design, involving familiar areas that get unlocked as you progress. However, many games of the era provide a map, which Cold Fear does not, much to the chagrin of contemporary critics. Now, lacking a map is often fine if your levels open up in a way that would intuitively guide your players in the right direction. Cold Fear has some well-indicated objectives and some gamified assistance in
"This looks like the wrong way,"
Hansen translating the Russian names of rooms if you hover over them, and being one of those titles where if enemies attack you, you're going the right way. I like the interconnectedness, and you shouldn't get lost as long as the objectives are made clear and you have a decent sense of direction. However, the objectives are not always made clear, and I have a dogshit sense of direction. I'll say this, I believe everyone has different types of intelligence, at least that's what I tell myself to feel better. Like, someone may be a good student, others excellent social skills, others good with their hands, others street smart, etc. But I'm a fucking moron when it comes to learning foreign language and any sense of direction. If I get lost, I'm very quick to take responsibility as it being my fault, not the game's. But several times it feels like Cold Fear is guiding you in the wrong direction. After a huge firefight and looting something you need off a guy with the messed up gun barrel, there's this huge elevator. So I continue through the next two areas, ending up where I won't need a return for several hours. It's just not intuitive here. And thankfully for the first 90% of the game, every time I got lost it was never for an awkward amount of time, although I was frequently thankful to find enemies. Thank goodness, I'm not lost! However, near the very end, you've opened up the entire environment, killed every enemy, and your next step is not made clear. I traversed the entire game, combed through every document, and I am super lost. I extrapolate I meant to get to this specific scientific dormitory because it's the only unopened area, but like many doors, it requires a code I don't have. That tells me I missed an item, so I go back over the entire setting again, never finding a code. Is this a bug? Did I miss the code in a previous area and I'm soft-locked? It was only when I was frustrated enough to arbitrarily check the next room over, the showers, that I discovered an opened passage. Nothing told me to access the dormitory or pass through the showers, a room I had already cleared hours earlier. How dare they make gamers, of all people, go through the shower? All that's to say is you may struggle much less than I did, and overall the level design was serviceable, but getting that lost late in the game really made me feel
none of this is any good. Fuck!
Exactly. Cold Fear's game world, however, is comprised of either a whaling vessel or an oil rig during an intense storm. Not only is this often a visual treat, but in most cases your environment is moving and has specific hazards. While the threat is minimal, Cold Fear's unique moving setting really sparks up exploration. While exploration is great, the activity you'll be doing the most is combat. The combat systems are not anything complex and nothing new to those who have played an over-the-shoulder shooter, so I'll cover the basics very quickly. You aim and shoot, each weapon has its own magazine and maximum ammo capacity, you have to find bullets for each, run out of ammo for one weapon, and switch to the next. There's a melee to push close enemies away or stomp on downed ones, special enemies have quick time event grabs if you let them get too close, and each enemy has a weak spot like the head for humanoids, or the big arm for this big guy. It's not rocket science and reminded me most of Dead Space, despite predating it by several years. Although simple, the combat has a lot of tangentially related mechanics that make it more interesting. First, headshots matter, which makes precise aiming matter, which makes the whole view angle and moving ship turn the otherwise simplistic head-clicking into a satisfyingly hectic affair. Admittedly, it can feel a little janky at times, but accommodating the setting's movements and your enemy's dodging was an enjoyable challenge, though I wasted a laughable amount of ammo at times. It'd be really frustrating to try to do a no damage run or something, but in my humble opinion, Cold Fear is for the experience, not for getting sweaty. Another related mechanic is your eventually collected arsenal of 7 guns. Pistol, shotgun, AK-47, MP5, grenade launcher, flamethrower, and spear gun. Now, I'll be the first to admit the arsenal in Cold Fear is far from unique, and I know that really bothers some people. The most unique weapon is a spear gun that attracts enemies to where it's fired. To me, though, how these rather bland weapons fit into the combat system has satisfying gameplay ramifications. For example, Cold Fear is really dark at times, like truly dark, and the pistol and MP5 are the only ones with a flashlight. What that means is if you're out of ammo with the pistol and MP5, you have to switch back and forth between a weapon with ammunition to the flashlight to see what the heck you're even looking at. It can get really hectic and pretty fun. Continuing, the pistol, AK-47, MP5, and spear gun are the only weapons with a laser pointer to tell you what in God's name you're even pointing at, but the shotgun is devastating up close on human enemies, and thematically very forgiving on headshots. The grenade launcher is a high damage area of effect weapon, but doesn't explode on impact, so frequently fast enemies just run right by it, making it best stacked with that spear gun. The AK-47 and MP5 are both larger magazine high damage assault weapons, and while the AK kicks way more, I found myself much more accurate with it for some reason. Lastly, the flamethrower is a powerful but incredibly short-range weapon dealing damage over time. It stuns humanoid enemies as they writhe in pain, and if you use it outside, the wind blows the flame, which can set you on fire. I could keep going, but these are the quick blurbs of each weapon's strengths and weaknesses, but often you'll be low on ammunition and having to use what you have rather than what would be best. I have a bit of a whiny complaint here though. Infected enemies when you kill them sort of shrink away and disappear. Now I thought this was saving 2005 processing power, but there are big firefights with uninfected human enemies and the ground gets littered with bodies, so that seems unlikely to be the reason. What makes it so annoying is the humanoid enemies are your most common adversary and often drop ammunition or health packs on death, only if you can get to their shriveling corpses before they disappear. There very well may be a lore lampshaded reason for this in the notes somewhere, but I didn't find it, so it's extra annoying. You couldn't leave behind the little bag. More annoyingly, trying to loot during combat is dangerous, and your loot key is also your melee or stomp key, so it can sometimes happen when you don't want it to as well. What I'm getting at is while there isn't traditional survival horror inventory management, you'll be managing your ammo and health frequently, making each area's restocking armory and medical bay incredibly helpful. Continuing into more interconnected mechanics is there are plenty of ways to save ammo besides the obvious running away from enemies. Cold Fear has a laughable amount of notes highlighting different environmental hazards like combustible barrels, high-pressure steam valves, explosive fire extinguishers, flammable valves. Strategizing around the environment is highly satisfying and saves a lot of ammo. I'll admit I didn't do this nearly as often as I should have, because these items are mostly scattered around as set dressing. It's not the telltale, I see a barrel, I'll benefit from shooting it sort of game design of other titles. I needed to unsee them as set dressing and remind myself they were useful most of the time. But these are your MLG Pro Cold Fear strat. One option that wasn't initially spelled out for you, although was later hilariously the second before it was very helpful, is you can shoot electrical boxes in flooded areas to deal huge damage to anything in the water, which can be you, of course. Specific rooms have other options, like this crushing valve room, or how about this lever for an extendable bridge? I'm coming, Elizabeth. So, a lot is going on in the combat system despite its surface simplicity, and Cold Fear pulls together some fun set pieces as well. Not the obligatory turret or driving section, thank goodness, but avoiding improvised explosives, sudden huge fights, getting through an area without misfiring a shot, and running from hazards at odd angles was a bit of my kryptonite, even if visually enjoyable. Despite the proficient set pieces, here's a bit of a gameplay spoiler for you. Cold Fear has no boss battles other than the final. They segment big objectives and areas with clever set pieces rather than a boss. I thought I'd complain about this, but the standard combat in increasingly creative and interactable environments was really fun and didn't overstay its welcome. I'll wrap up gameplay by addressing one common critic complaint in this save system, as there are no manual saves. You simply get the option when you progress to a certain point and try to open a specific door. They're not necessarily when anything significant is going on. It's rare you get your save option then walk into a huge set piece, so dying can be a bit discouraging. I didn't find it to be a huge deal at all, though, personally. Genuinely, I really enjoyed Cold Fear's gameplay, combat, and systems. Sure, they weren't and aren't unique, but added enough to flesh out the systems to make them simple fun. Nothing feels low effort, so the gameplay was a real highlight. In covering all of that information, we've already seen a lot of Cold Fear, so let's unpack what we're working with. I'm tempted to make an era comparison here, but I really don't like doing that. If I say 1981's Ultima 1 for the Apple II looks worse than Wizardry Proving Grounds for the Mad Overlord from that same year, is anyone gonna care? Because they both look like Microsoft Paint. I don't think so, but it's worth bringing up. We had a glut of games in the early mid-2000s of mostly simplistic technological environments with very bland color schemes. If it wasn't outside, muddy brown action games, it was dull grays on the inside. Repetitive metal plating, industrial rooms without any discernible function, we just hope you don't think about it, or why are completely barren hallways so long? Get a ficus or something. Cold Fear's environments maintain that same design philosophy inherited from games like System Shock, and most of Cold Fear's environments won't feel unique. That said, besides the incredibly bland transitory settings, there's some good stuff here. Enough rooms contain specific assets and character to stand out, and have their own charm. One kitchen area had a gas burner that was left on, and I have one of these ranges in real life, and I was begging Hanson, just turn it off, please. The utility bill is going to be nuts. Another environment which stood out to me is an underwater glass tunnel. Sure, it's a small area and you can count the pixels on the fish swimming by, but I love these in any sort of media or in real life. Like, I don't know, the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha. I stood in their aquarium tube looking up like a moron for a long time. It would make very little sense, but I wanted a distant sea monster or some shit, and it was nice to have an area spark more imagination. Sadly, there isn't much in regards to environmental storytelling other than people died horribly, but one area I appreciated, the refractory, demonstrated a holdout in which people died horribly. Worth mentioning, to me at least, I don't know, is the concept art for these often less than unique areas is really great. I'd love to own concept art like this one day, and it's really amazing almost every environmental concept was fully implemented, albeit with less of an awesome art style. So, most environments are not unique even if they demonstrate charm, until you step outside. Yeah, I buried the lead. The Raging Storm looks and feels fucking awesome. Water spews over the side, it has gameplay ramifications as you can get buffeted by waves, equipment moves and can hurt you. It makes you miss a lot of shots, or maybe just me. I just love the look of these areas, and the storm raging through the whole game feels consistent, grounded, and I've experienced few games from any era with such a great storm. It was a huge part of Darkworks' vision for Cold Fear, a dynamic setting you can feel throughout the entire world. Using an engine built in-house called a Darkwave Editor, which sounds like a music creation software, they made the whole whaling vessel move with a physics system meant to interact with objects on board. Apparently this was very difficult as it required 9 times more animations for Hansen, and more than 900 separate animations for all characters, allowing for over 5,000 character movements. I really don't know what that means, but that sounds like a lot of movements.
Wow, that is fast!
And I think it paid off as every major animation feels really smooth. Unfortunately, the moving environment wasn't able to go as far as they intended, only present holistically on the whaling vessel rather than the oil rig, and some rooms had to simulate the movement with animations and lighting effects. For an 18-month development cycle, what they released is exceptional. I really only have 2 minor issues with the environments and the movement system. First, dead bodies behave strangely, other than the ones that disappear with all the loot you need. They rock back and forth, likely meant to simulate the movement of the waves, it just looks off to me. Second, in certain areas the camera defaults to a set angle which hides the best part of the environment. You don't see the inside of this spooky freezer, you see a lot of the floor, which negatively impacted the immersion at parts. Okay, seeing as I just spent near 700 words describing Cold Fear's environments, I need to move on. I already spoke highly of character animations. Those are great. Like, check out this Russian guy rolling out from cover. Well, he looked cool for a second there. Headshots are gnarly, the shotgun especially. Giblets flying, painting the environment red, enemy bodies tossed backwards. At least most of the time. Infected human enemies will finish their attack animation, which can damage you before they remember to die. One of those is it a bug or a feature moments. Along with water all over the screen, you get blood spatter, and it's a real wonder you can see anything with all that going on, but maybe I'm just used to it because my glasses are often comically dirty. I noticed some other small little details that I appreciated, like glass breaking in a firefight and bloody footprints being left behind, but cutscenes are not Cold Fear's forte. There's not a lot of them, and the longest and most significant is so buried in film effects I had no idea what was going on. All others are animated within the game's engine, and they look it. In a section you lose if the woman you're protecting dies, the game over animation made me laugh out loud.
Anna!
As did the cutscene I started the video with. What is this expression? What's going on in his head? Why did so many character models from this era have eyes that look slightly in opposite directions? Anyway, last to discuss in the visuals are the in-game models. We're already kind of spilling into that. The fish aside, barrels are laughably low poly and other interactables are nothing special. Character models are unfortunately not amazing either, as they feel very run-of-the-mill basic. Unlike the environments, characters and enemies went through a lot of different design concepts. Sure, Coast Guard Hansen looks a lot more unique than Navy SEAL Hansen at least, and Anna's name and design changed a lot of times. Some more cutesy, some more sexy, before landing on her eventual, dare I say, incredibly generic design. I'm almost shocked they didn't choose this one for the most 2005 design ever. Other friendly characters are so generic I have nothing to say about them, so let's move on to the 7 enemy types, excluding the final boss. I'll go from most to least generic. First, Russian uninfected baddies. They're basic dudes with guns, the least excited enemy to encounter and the easiest to kill. 2. Infected humans, fast-moving zombie-like enemies, mostly with short melee weapons, although they can occasionally have guns. They reminded me a lot of Dead Space 3 basic enemies, and while they're a real threat in numbers, I can't say their design is interesting. Concept art seemed to start with them being zombies, essentially, before being altered to sickly humanoids with glowing eyes. Again, the concept art looks fantastic, but transfers to the game world as pretty boring. Next, you find these living blobs on the wall that spit out other enemies, and, well, they're big blobs on the wall. Even the concept art looks the same. The enemies they spit out, however, I kinda like. Exocells, the little creatures that reanimate the dead, the facehugger stand-in, really reminded me of mimics from Prey. They move fluidly and creep around subtly on floors or ceilings, can do a ton of damage up close, and occasionally jump out of dead bodies. All stages of their concept art are gross and excellent, and I think this is the design that transferred off the page into the game with the least magic lost, though most of their creepiness comes from their animation rather than their aesthetic. The last 3 get into the more outlandish enemies, the first being this dog-like thing that crawls on the ceiling. These make one hell of an entrance, have high health, outrun Hansen, do high damage, can quick time event grab you, attack from alternative angles. They're ambush predators, and their AI, although simple, made them the most intimidating enemy to fight. I love these guys from a gameplay perspective, but are again underwhelming from a design standpoint. I can't really blame them, as the thing never moves slowly enough to get a good look at it and disappears upon death. It's okay. Second last are camouflaging humanoid enemies, which again have great gameplay impact and can certainly be startling. These are not stealth boys from Fallout. You cannot see these guys hardly at all other than footstep animations and the tiniest little shimmer. Great fights, again bland design you don't see much of as they're literally invisible and then poof away on death. Lastly, again other than the final boss, are these big hulking enemies with one wimpy arm and one huge arm. They're intimidating, as you have to take an elevator with 3 sleeping in tubes, but they're my least favorite. Their AI seems the most delicate, there are notes that clearly spell out how to defeat them long before you even find one, and once again, their design is alright, it doesn't feel unique, and really the character design overall was a negative, as they didn't break any ground with a concept open for near infinite creativity. Concept art shows some really cool ideas, like corrupted or transformed animals, Navy SEAL Hansen fighting an emaciated female creature with a lightning gun, the mutant Cryo looks fantastic, and although some look like Digimon, most are great and I would have loved to see them at the very least for more creativity, but also a few more enemy types would have been a benefit. Cold Fear's visuals are a mixed bag, but not a mix of terrible and great, more a mix of generic and generic but cool, with a particular highlight being the outside environments. The audio continues that theme, the standard sound effects more a mix of bad to satisfyingly serviceable. For example, alarms blaring, keycard doors, explosive traps, sticky noises are not good, but the sound for weapons, most enemies, and environments are solid, especially for the stormy areas. I particularly liked running up and down stairs. It's so slow with those little tippy-tap noises. Adorable. Other than ambience, the soundscape is not distracting, but below average to serviceable. Moving on from the basic effects, talking about voice acting in survival horror games is tough, because sometimes it's really bad.
The strangling ritual.
Sometimes it's really bad, which makes it good.
Barry! Where's Barry?
Well, I'm sorry, but he's probably...
No.
And sometimes you can't tell if it's good or bad, but it ends up great.
Hold it. Where do you think you're going?
My daughter. I've got to find her.
I'd argue if anything in Cold Fear is lacking, it's the voice acting. Not because there's so little of it, because it's not good. The person you hear the most is Tom Hansen, of course, voiced by Dominic Gold. He doesn't have a huge career, but arguably his most significant credits are Von Borchert in The Council season in Episode 2.
You want to play the hero? Pity you're not in any position to do so.
And Todd Williams in Detroit Become Human.
That's Alice. You look after her. Homework, bath, all that crap. Got it?
Despite saying a line weirdly every once in a while, he's perfectly proficient for the somewhat generic wisecracking action man they wanted in Tom Hansen.
Bravo, 7-9er, can you hear me? What's going on here, Colonel? Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you. Hansen! Hansen! Just kidding. Mother of God, Bennett, you would not believe what I just saw. Can you tell me what the hell is going on here?
The next most frequent voice is Dana Westberg as Special Agent Bennett, or the guy who talks in your earpiece most of the game. Westberg is mostly an additional voices actor, but played Isaac Petty in the 2002 Platoon game.
Boys, we must move out towards the village, but make it quick and remain quiet as we're on our own.
And Boris Charov in 2004's Siberia 2.
But I've flown among the stars, Kate Walker. Not many men can say so much.
Like Dominic Gold, Westberg does a solid job portraying a generic character, this time a military agent hard-ass type.
Just some Russian hooker Ubisoft had on board. Hey Hansen, here's the plan. You find the codes you need to unlock the autopilot. No transmissions in or out except in a very tight window that we can't get into.
Next, a bit part as Colonel Dmitry Yusupov, is Miglin Merchev, a Bulgarian actor known mostly for playing Russians in French television and movies. Almost all credits are incredibly French-looking titles, playing characters with incredibly Russian names, depicting a Vlad 7 times, Ivan 4 times, and even Tsar Alexander II. Cold Fear may be his only video game credit. He's best known for being Ivanov Kovechkiv in Of Money and Blood, Stepan in The Bureau, but my favorite credit is the Russian hitman in the music video for Fade Away by French electro artist Vitalik, which is a banger. Unsurprisingly, his accent and performance is excellent, albeit very short.
Speak English. It doesn't matter now. Locked up for protection after that idiot Captain Lubensky hid in the cold storage.
Now, other than the incidental voice acting, which is bad to serviceable,
unauthorized personnel have been detected.
On my mark.
I want to discuss two more actors together as they struggle with the same issue. Gay Marshall voicing Anna and Douglas Rand depicting the Russian Dr. Pavel are both good voice actors, which is why I like showing other credits that these actors have done. Marshall's most significant credit was likely Nino and Dorky in Dracula Resurrection.
I am a woman who has been rejected and betrayed.
But I've discussed her on the channel before for her solid work as Dina and Shazia in Lost Eden.
If you come to fight the tyrant filth, you are welcome.
Douglas Rand is still working today, his first credit being the magician in 1995's Rayman.
Hi, folks! You wanna know what's going on?
But other highlights include Dan in Detroit Become Human.
It was a bit difficult getting it back in working order.
And Marcus Kane in The Indigo Prophecy.
Lucas? Is that you, Lucas? What's going on?
Like, they're both solid voice actors, but in Cold Fear, they're being made to do bad Russian accents.
We can call the drilling platform my father works on.
So now tell me whose life I just saved. You know Anna, yes?
Look, the seas are too rough for us to dock with the oil rig, yes?
I'm trying to hold out until you return. Das Vidania.
It's not really even in a funny way, and Anna near the end sounds like she's doing a different accent altogether.
You need to help me destroy this place!
Overall, the voice acting is generic and serviceable, and I thought I'd say the same of the music. Initially, things felt like action movie schlock. Some orchestra, some light choir, heavy drums. And while Cold Fear definitely has those tracks, others elevate to pretty slick, industrial, intense, or ambient tracks. Cold Fear's soundtrack was composed by Tom Salta, who has a long career in video game scoring. Need for Speed Underground 2, Prince of Persia Forgotten Sands, Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Advanced Warfare 1 and 2, and some of Deathloop, Cold Fear being one of his earlier credits. Basically, Ubisoft reached out to Salta asking for a pitch, which earned him the gig and ended up as the opening track when you boot up the game. He did the entire score short of one track, over an hour of music, in less than 6 weeks, aiming for the director's prompt for a cinematic score but adding his own vision of something, quote, epic and disturbing. I felt that vision and ended up enjoying how the soundtrack elevates the gameplay. Now, I mentioned that every track except for one was composed by Salta. The 2000s were an era of licensing music for games, especially to be played over the credits. Industrial heavy metal and punk artists were the most common. Ubisoft reached out to an individual named Brian Hugh Warner, as you may have heard of as Marilyn Manson, for their song Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth off their 2003 album, The Golden Age of Grotesque. I grew up in the era of Marilyn Manson's ubiquity. I mean, they were everywhere, but never personally being a metalhead and being somewhat weirded out by their aesthetic, I was not a fan. I just wanted to listen to my Blink-182 and my Bare Naked Ladies. These days, however, Manson has a laundry list of pretty terrible allegations against them, and having never liked them growing up, I was expecting to hate the song. Surprisingly, that wasn't the case, but really my resulting feeling to hearing the song was a question. Manson aside, why waste money on licensing a song for the credits? I assume it's marketing purposes, but I've never played a game in my life for touting a single song, even if I were to have liked the artist. How many gamers are going to get that far to even hear it? I don't know, but it's there. Take it for what it is. So in covering the visuals and audio, we have a pretty good picture on how it all comes together, and I wouldn't blame anyone for concluding the presentation is generic, acceptable, or rudimentarily charming. Totally fair. But, and I can't completely describe it, playing Cold Fear has great vibes. I know that's particularly subjective, but whatever coleslaw of attributes causes this feeling, I can only speculate, and I didn't think I was particularly nostalgic for this era in gaming. The closest I can say is that it has a fun atmosphere. I really enjoyed the tone and feel of it. The vibes are good. Cold Fear as a vibe-based economy. As a survival horror title, good atmosphere and game feel is an enormous asset, and the cracks at horror are pretty good. I wasn't really scared, but the attempt at jump scares are solid. Although unscripted ones got me the best. They take a solid crack at a spooky atmosphere and downright achieve it in several areas. Dark, the enemies are genuine threats, and Hansen isn't particularly nimble, so some level of disempowerment remains despite carrying an arsenal. Basically, Cold Fear's overall presentation is solid, leaning slightly above average overall, and I'm still impressed at how well they rendered a terrific storm. On to the story, and it's hard to know what to expect stepping into a survival horror title. They can vary from contemplative, surreal, and metaphoric to B-movie schlock. If you've watched this far, you likely know where Cold Fear falls.
Hey! Come here!
Genuinely, I could summarize Cold Fear's plot in about 2 sentences, but there's some fun peripheral stuff, so I'll comb through it a little closer than that. So, our opening cutscene is a military force responding to a Russian whaling vessel's distress beacon, to which they all get killed by something. The American Coast Guard also picks up the signal, thinking it's a typical rescue, only to all get killed except for our buddy Tom. So who is Tom Hansen? Well, from a meta sense, he's your typical wisecracking, I don't have time for this badass type character you've probably seen in other titles. Is there any more to his character? Well, in the manual, Tom Hansen was, quote, once a hero, now disgraced, happy to fade into the woodwork, saving lives with the Coast Guard. All that changes when his vessel receives an order to rescue a whaling ship during a raging storm. What he finds there will reawaken the dying embers of his spirit, if it doesn't kill him first. On a hellbound vessel, everyone is dead weight. I don't know, I love that slogan. They should have used it more. Dare I say that sounds like a character arc, and Hansen is the sole surviving rescuer of whatever went on here. As we know from the gameplay section, they're not playing Duck Duck Goose or some shit. Parasitic creatures named exocells are killing and reanimating the crew in direct violation of the Seafarers Union. Not only humans though, apparently dogs and fucking orcas too, the serial killers of the sea. In exploring the whaling vessel, Hansen discovers a few things. First, literally everyone is trying to kill him, infected or not. Second, a CIA special agent, Jason Bennett, starts giving him orders over a headset with unknown motivations. Third, illicit experiments conducted by a Dr. Kamsky are taking place at a nearby Russian oil rig. And lastly, his daughter, Anna Kamsky, is aboard the ship. Goaded by Bennett to rescue, or perhaps arrest, Anna, Hansen frees her from the room she's locked in, and she immediately wants to get them to the oil rig by crashing into it.
Oh crap, we're gonna hit the platform, aren't we?
That will make jumping easier, won't it?
You're out of your mind, woman!
The two need to separate temporarily to turn off the autopilot, so Hansen gives Anna his earpiece to communicate.
And here, put this on.
What is it?
It's a radio. It will let us keep in touch. Just wipe it off first.
I know he's probably referring to blood spatter that might be on it or something, but I thought he was talking about earwax. Meanwhile, Bennett warns that the Russian rig has a signal jammer that'll prevent his communication, and Hansen is meant to destroy it. Reluctantly agreeing, Hansen turns the autopilot off, runs to the crow's nest with Anna, and the ship crashes into the oil rig. Here's the time to break for spoilers. If you want to experience this plot, learn more about whatever mysterious machinations are taking place, jump forward to the time on screen now. Who knows what terrible things these Russians are up to. Alright, upon crashing, Anna and Hansen are thrown from the ship, Anna landing in the water, Hansen falling unconscious on the rig long enough to be infected by an exocell. Sure, that's bad, but waking up here is pretty dope, honestly. I mean, you're missing all your equipment other than a pistol, you're injured, and I didn't know whether or not Hansen even knew he was infected. Well, you stumble into a medical bay and discover a Russian doctor named Pavel. I love characters like Pavel, the clear info dump plot characters, as he immediately uses an antidote on Hansen and just pours context on us. Right as I'm processing that exocells are prehistoric aliens or prehistoric aliens the Russians discovered by drilling
too greedily and too deep
and are now being experimented on by Dr. Kamsky, I realize Pavel just left. Like, where are you going? Okay, thanks for the lore, buddy. I mean, there was an infodump character on the whaling vessel, so I should...
Hansen, one more thing.
Yeah?
You need to...
Absolute art. Anyway, Pavel told us that we won't be able to turn off the jammer as Officer Onyshchenko's retinal scan is the only way we're getting in. I personally really like the gallows humor trope of removing a bad guy's body part to access an area, so we go kill him and take his eye for the scan. Inside, we shut off the jammer to reconnect with Bennett, who insists we collect information about Dr. Kamsky's experiments. We stumble across a surveillance room where we witness some giant, skull-tentacle humanoid creature that surely isn't the final boss, rescuing Anna and infecting her with an exocell. Bennett told Hansen to forget about Anna and focus on the research, but Hansen says he's rescuing her anyway. While traveling all over the rig to find an antidote, we learn the Russians stopped drilling, killed the workers who knew anything, converted the rig into a floating lab, and studied the exocells. The antidote wasn't designed as an intended cure, but more in hopes the exocell and host would create a perfect symbiotic relationship, resulting in superpowers or whatever. Hansen gets infected again, appearing in an area of the rig covered in biomass and housing the skull creature, impervious to damage. While we eventually find Anna in the decontamination room, and Hansen chooses to use the one antidote on her rather than himself, passing out shortly afterward. Okay, do we die and play as Anna? No. We wake up, Anna is gone, and Hansen tells Bennett we'll get him his damn notes as long as he gets Anna off the rig. Okay, well, soon Anna contacts us on her earwax headset, and I'm wondering, did I miss a cutscene? Is our life saved, or are we still infected? Anna says we're only going to die if we try to go get those notes, inferring we're no longer infected, and Hansen is totally cool with dying as long as Anna's okay. Honestly, it was pretty confusing, and I was wondering, is this the era-appropriate wannabe heroism of quote-unquote save the pretty girl no matter the cost? It's probably what's going on here, which is dumb, but I'm going to take the more charitable and certainly untrue interpretation that Tom Hansen is completely dedicated to his responsibility as a coastie. Those guys are pretty badass, I don't know what to tell you. Here's where I get very, 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 very lost, but find Kamsky's computer with the research notes and go to transfer them to Bennett. Starting the transfer, Bennett demands all the data, to which Hansen says to get it himself. This upsets Bennett so much that he decides to disappear from the story altogether. Meanwhile, Anna has us wire up the oil rig with explosives that we can detonate as we take off in the helicopter left behind on the helipad. Exploding several areas, we go to wire up the helipad before we take off, but Dr. Kamsky shows up to stop us. I'm not sure if he's trying to kill Anna, but we do lose if he reaches her, making our job to distract him until the explosives are planted. The concept art for the boss design is really cool, but I was a little underwhelmed despite it probably being Cold Fear's best design. Not sure the big goofy skull was the best idea, but I appreciate the Slenderman tentacles, I guess. Once planting all the explosives, Anna runs off to pilot the helicopter, and we need to kill Dr. Kamsky to escape with Anna. From a gameplay perspective, the boss battle is hard, inconsistent, and frustrating. I fought this dude so many times, spending a ton of time shooting up his left ass cheek, and after distracting him long enough, I had no idea how to kill him. What you have to do is let yourself get grabbed to QuickTime event critical strike him in the face 3 times. I cannot be convinced that anyone genuinely likes QuickTime events, but we eventually beat him. Anna picks us up, we fly off and explode the rig. Credits roll. Okay, I have a lot of questions. What happened to the Bennett storyline? Even simpler, how was Hansen disgraced? I mean, it's in the manual. Clearly some stuff is incomplete, but here's my guess. I think that Hansen was meant to have let some other woman die at some point, leading to him being disgraced, which is why Bennett chides him to keep Anna alive at some point.
Oh, that's right, Hansen. You get your girlfriend shot, not eaten by monsters.
Back off, Bennett.
And this would provide some sort of emotional arc. A desire for redeeming his past inaction would explain Hansen's over-allegiance to Anna and indifference to sacrificing himself. Bennett, knowing this history, could guilt Hansen into transferring dangerous Russian information so the Americans could experiment with exocells and probably cause another outbreak, for the eventual Cold Fear 2 or whatever. Although that's, extrapolatable, what we're left behind with and what's actually on the disc is muddled, has almost no characterization, and barely makes sense at times. In welcoming back our spoiler avoiders, I'll summarize I don't think Cold Fear has an interesting or well-executed story, but it was serviceable enough to elevate the gameplay and setting. I'm saying, it's muddled, but who really cares? As you progress, however, you unlock more concept art extras, which I'm sure you can guess I really enjoyed. It's good stuff, short of a few of Anna's designs looking as if they were designed by a 2005 police composite sketch program. Anyway, last notes on the story, Cold Fear's narrative is a fun, tropey, B-action movie plot with a few inspired subversions of tropes. So while the story is bad, it's almost fitting that it's bad. Again, I really like the vibe of Cold Fear, and its somewhat schlocky plot is a part of that, albeit not that big of one. wow, we're here. To summarize, I enjoyed Cold Fear way more than I was expecting, and consider it an overlooked gem of the genre, although not a redefining innovative one or anything like that. I'm not sure how much Resident Evil 4 was an influence, as it was in development at the same time, and that title only came out a few months before, but I get the impression some aspects were adjusted, likely resulting in the game struggling to stand on its own against a title with such a huge industry impact. With Darkworks folding, Guillaume Girard stayed in the industry, mostly working on virtual reality projects for Starbreeze, but staying on the business side of things. Anthony Villette had a wild career swing, managing information systems at the Picasso Museum in Paris for 7 years before working at Microids Paris, directing 3 titles including Asterisk and Obelisk Slap Them All 2, UFO Robot Grendizer, The Feast of the Wolves, and Flashback 2. I'm glad they stayed or returned to the industry because they managed a studio that produced 2 quirky but enjoyable games. As for my personal recommendation, well, I reoriented my rating system quite a bit. The different attributes were weighed differently, and I added a category, resulting in a few changes, but most of them were not super significant. It's an iteration. I'm doing my best here, okay? So in applying this system, grading Cold Fear in each of my categories and compiling it into a grade, it falls between Filcher and Lost Eden in the category Best for Genre Enthusiasts. While I liked it as a bit of a gaming archaeologist and it has some general charm, survival horror fans are most likely to enjoy Cold Fear, and to whom I recommend it. So with that, after talking for over 90 minutes and my throat hurting, we've arrived at the end. Thank you for joining me for this spin of the wheel of every game ever made. My name is Harvey Bodega. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.